Today, federal employees faced a midnight deadline to accept a so called deferred resignation. This has been commonly referred to as a buyout by the corporate media, which is a wildly inaccurate way of both normalizing and describing what's happening here. This is what Judd Legum at Popular Information has to say. The Trump administration wanted federal employees to believe that if they agreed to resign effective September 30th, they would receive their full payment until then and not have to work for the next 8 months. This is not the case. There are no lump sum payments, and the fine print makes clear that federal employees could be agreeing to resign in exchange for nothing. In other words, these agreements have no legitimacy and carry no long-term guarantees for civil servants. In the lead up to tonight's deadline, federal employees are getting advice from former Twitter employees who know whereof they speak. They've been begging federal workers to pay attention because they've lived through destruction firsthand. Their advice: document everything, use encrypted communications, and do not comply without question, which sounds like really good advice for the rest of us as well. Musk's entire leadership model is to be a wrecking ball. Fire first, ask questions, probably never. And as we saw with Twitter, sometimes those impulsive moves backfire, or do they? I think it depends entirely on what your goals are in the first place. Agencies like USID, the FBI, and the Office of Personnel Management may not be able to resist the immediate damage. But if these agencies end up with anything like this situation Twitter was left in, crawling with MAGA trolls, taken over by fascists, then none of us should be surprised. People like Elon Musk and Donald Trump are incapable of creating anything, which is why they take their hatchets and their chainsaws to the federal government in order to get what they want. This is not about reducing this country to rubble and then rebuilding something else that better serves their purposes. It is about reducing this country to rubble and then lording over the rubble. For now, federal employees are living with a target on their backs. And things just got more chaotic. Hours before tonight's deadline, a federal judge stepped in to hit the brakes. The Trump regime uh, enforced resignations. Let's call it what it is. It's a scam for federal employees has been paused by a federal judge in Boston, and the temporary restraining order means employees who were being pressured to resign by midnight now have at least a few more days to consider their options. A hearing is set for Monday, but until then, the forced exodus is on hold. The ruling throws the entire scheme into disarray. Um, Unfortunately, though, more than 40,000 workers, that's about 2% of the total workforce, has already accepted the offer, the very suspect offer. But unions and legal experts have been warning that the whole thing may be illegal after all. The American Federation of Government Employees and other unions argue that Donald's rushed plan violates multiple laws and could leave employees stranded without pay if courts ultimately strike it down, which they certainly should. Let's not forget the massive chaos this is creating. If even 5 to 10% of federal workers suddenly vanish, which is the goal, expect massive delays in VA claims, Social Security benefits, tax processing, and much, much more. And with the deadline now in limbo, the uncertainty for federal workers just skyrocketed. And again, this is part of the point as well. While everybody is scrambling to figure out where they stand, what their rights are, what their options are, whether or not the rule of law is going to hold for them, whether or not they're going to be able to continue working or resign, or if forced out, be able to support their families, be able to support themselves, be able to pay their bills. In the meantime, that makes it much easier for Donald and Elon Musk to do what they really are setting out to do: destroy the United States government to their benefit. The resignation email has been called a fork in the road because that's exactly what it is. Federal employees were told that they had until midnight to take the buyout. 8 months of pay and benefits through September, or risk getting forced out later, which, of course, sounds like a good plan, but these are not people we can trust. All of this should sound familiar because this is exactly the same strong arm tactic that Musk used when he took over Twitter, which is something that we should never really forgive at Jack for. So Musk, who's of course now running the illegitimate, unauthorized, unconstitutional so-called agency, the Department of Government Efficiency, is applying his usual burn it all down strategy to the federal workforce because, as I mentioned earlier, this is a person incapable of true vision. He's incapable of building anything worth having. But now that the judge has paused the plan, the regime is scrambling. And that's where we want them whenever we can get them there. Here's the goal: get rid of career public servants, replace them with political appointees who are loyal not to the United States, not to the United States Constitution, but only solely to Donald Trump, wipe out civil service protections. This is not about saving money, although it will do that, and it will funnel even more money into the United States Treasury, which, of course, Elon Musk and his hacker children have access to, making it easier for them to enrich themselves and their tech dude oligarch bros. It's much, much more about power. Here's Adam Schiff, Senator Adam Schiff of California, explaining it.
But why is this firing of the FBI agents such an important piece of this whole effort by Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and their enablers? Because if they're going to take money from the public fisc, if they're going to enrich themselves with their meme coins, if they're going to raid the Treasury, if they're going to take people's private data, if they're going to try to illegally shut down agencies, they don't want a department, God forbid, to say no, that violates the law. They don't want an FBI that's going to examine anything they're doing. So stripping the department of its independence, instilling fear in thousands and thousands of FBI agents, telling them you are just one wrong step away from being fired. This is the way to ensure that when they raid the Treasury, there is no one there to call out what they're doing.
Now, of course, it remains to be seen if even a legitimate Department of Justice, a legitimate FBI, and a legitimate federal judiciary would be able to stop these people. But why take chances? Because as Senator Schiff said, if your plan is to loot the Treasury, seize private data of American citizens for your own malign uses, and to shut down agencies, you may as well have an FBI that actually is not going to investigate you and a DOJ that is not going to impede you in any way, which makes perfect sense, which leads us to Pam Bondi, who tragically has just been confirmed to be the new United States Attorney General. After being sworn in yesterday, Bondi issued a directive ordering a probe into the federal prosecutions. Remember, there were more than one of Donald, and she's calling a so-called quote unquote weaponization working group, unquote, to review special counsel Jack Smith's cases against Donald and examine the DOJ's handling of January 6th prosecutions. But Bondi, of course, isn't stopping there because, again, why would she? She's also directing the DOJ to investigate private companies with DEIA initiatives. Her memo labels diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility programs as illegal discrimination and calls for legal action against corporations, nonprofits, bar associations, and universities with large endowments. Legal experts say this interpretation stretches beyond Supreme Court rulings and could violate free speech protections. Stretches beyond? Could? Okay, we need to do much better than that. Courts have already ruled that banning DEIA efforts in private organizations violates the First Amendment, setting up a likely battle over Bondi's crackdown. But what First Amendment we're probably going to be asking ourselves in the not too distant future. Now, in yet another stunning move, the FBI is preparing to disband its team specializing in countering foreign intellection interference. Following Bondi's directive, the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force, which was established after Russia's interference in the 2016 election, remember the Russia hoax? It's being shut down. The team, which was tasked with countering foreign threats to U.S. elections, is being dismantled in what Bondi said in a memo to, quote, free resources to address more pressing priorities and end risks of further weaponizations and abuses of prosecutorial discretion. The Foreign Influence Task Force shall be disbanded, unquote. This is not about efficiency. Obviously, this is about ensuring that no one is watching. Bondi and Donald are gutting the very systems meant to prevent foreign intellection meddling. So the question is not if this will make our elections more vulnerable. The question is, when will we see the consequences of our elections having been made more vulnerable? Now, to be clear, the reason this is happening is that I cannot say with complete certainty that Donald is the only presidential candidate to benefit from illegal foreign interference, but he's certainly the one who benefited the most from it. And he does not want anybody to interfere with the ability of hostile foreign governments to interfere with our elections. One of the main reasons he won in 2016 illegitimately is because he invited, not benefited from, but actively invited Russian interference in our election, which is why that task force was formed in the first place. Speaking of foreign relations, this brings us to Donald's next target, which is USAID. Bill Gates, the guy who runs Microsoft, just had to step in. Also, not just runs Microsoft, but has donated hundreds of millions of dollars for health initiatives throughout the world, doing I don't know, insignificant things like helping cure malaria and preventing the needless deaths of millions of children. He stepped in and to remind Donald that maybe gutting the country's premier foreign agency is not a particularly good idea. Watch this clip.
So I went to see President Trump to say, look, we both believe in saving lives. What can we do to accelerate innovation? With the COVID vaccine, he did accelerate the availability of that.
And you said he seemed receptive in the meeting, but then fast forward 3 weeks later, he signs an executive order withdrawing the U.S. from the World Health Organization, Elon Musk shutting down USAID, freezing foreign aid. So do you feel like he was sort of placating you, or do you still feel hopeful?
No, I'm still hopeful. I think all Americans can agree that keeping people alive, for very little money, we should be proud of that. It started back with President Bush. There's some disruption going on now, and I want to, engage positively to get things back on track.
Okay, not all Americans actually agree on that, especially if that small bit of money is going to foreign people, especially those who aren't white. I agree with Bill Gates that we should all be hopeful, but we shouldn't waste our hope on miserable excuses of human beings like Donald Trump. To be hopeful that somebody who has shown us time and time again that he is cruel and vicious and likes nothing more than to cause human suffering is quite a quite misguided use of your hope. Also, to pretend that Donald cares about any of this at this point is inexcusable ignorance. So Gates met with Donald and his completely useless chief of staff, Susie Wiles, calling USAID the best development agency in the world, which it until quite recently was. Meanwhile, Musk, who somehow believes that he understands global development, or or should have any role in it, has called the USAID a criminal organization, possibly because they were quite effective at helping to end apartheid in South Africa, and we know that Musk is a huge fan of apartheid because he and his fellow white South Africans so benefited from it. We all know that Musk has never read a briefing in his life, so I don't necessarily think that he either knows or cares what USAID actually does. Gates pointed out that if you dismantle USAID, you cannot rebuild that infrastructure overnight, which is also the point. This regime is not looking to replace anything with anything better. Not the Affordable Care Act, not Social Security, not Medicare, not our diplomacy, not our national security approach. None of it. None of it. They want it gone. So here we are. And still, too many people, presumably on the right side of things, do not understand the urgency of this moment. It is a 5-alarm fire, followed by another 5-alarm fire, and on and on and on. We're in a breathtaking, unprecedented, I'm going to use that word, constitutional crisis. It is serious, it is deepening, it is worsening, and it is spreading. We need to act accordingly. Please take a second and like and share this video. It'd be awesome if you could subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to us in podcast form, please follow us and give the show a 5-star rating because it really does help other people find our content. Thanks.